He is Russian by heritage, American by birth, and Scottish by choice. Dave Cohen came here to study in 1958 and stayed on to teach at the Edinburgh College of Art and set up his own studios in the village of Juniper Green. During the 1973 Edinburgh Festival, a retrospective exhibition of his work demonstrated why Cohen is so highly regarded in Europe and America. He has plans to extend his activities to Speyside, to put down even more roots in his adopted country. Scotland traditionally gives the rest of the world the best of her ideas and people. We can well afford to be nourished by artists and craftsmen of Cohen's outstanding ability, for whom the making of a soup bowl or a coffee mug demands as much care as a daring ceramic sculpture 6 feet high.
We do have an electric machine for bigger articles. Once we get over, I would say, about the 2-pound or 3-pound ball, then it becomes a little bit impractical because you wear yourself out. But in a sense, this machine isn't faster than an electric wheel by any means, but it's silent. You can listen to music in your studio, and there is no possibility of this machine breaking down. You know, if one relies completely on an electric wheel, and a lot of the electric wheels that I have seen are vulnerable to this. This is one reason that we use the kick wheel. Maybe our production isn't as high as somebody would have using a motorized wheel, but at least we have this peace and quiet, and we have the prerogative of listening to music or be in an environment of complete silence. For me, making mugs and soup bowls also contribute, I think, to the larger scale things that I do, simply because it is a counterfoil to making very, very large multiple things or concentrating on sculptural pieces. It gives you a little bit of time to still keep your hand with the medium, but also have a time just to relax and not overload yourself continually doing one-off pieces. If you talk to most potters, I think they'll all agree that one of the most difficult things to do is to design good domestic ware. A mug that feels good, soup bowl that works very well also. Under Miss Horsman at the college, I studied for 1 year doing ceramics and sculpture. And after a year, I applied for a grant fellowship to study with Paul Sollner, who is a very, very well-known potter in the United States, doing ceramics with him. And after a year out in California, 1963, I decided to come back to Scotland and hopefully start my own studio. In the meantime, they asked me if I'd like to come back and help them in the ceramics department at the college. So since 1965, I've been pretty well involved with the Edinburgh College of Art and with my own studio. If it did get buried and it was dug up in 3,000 years' time, I hope a person would look at it not as simply a rarity, as so many things have become today, and become valuable simply because there is only one left, So one hopes that in 3,000 years' time they still have the appreciation, or there is this underlying spiritual quality within the pot itself that is a lasting quality and still has something to say no matter what year that it's dug up, and is not simply cherished because it is a rarity. If I'm looking at things, I try to look at it not in a monetary sense, but simply in the way it was made, in the surface quality, the pattern, and try to identify it, in some way with the person that actually has made it. Pottery is just an extension of the three-dimensional aspect of art. For myself, it doesn't necessarily make any difference if I get involved with metal, if I get involved with wood, stone, any other material. For me, clay is a material that I can express myself in. The most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is through your work. I suppose it's a little bit consciously, I suppose it's a little bit unconsciously. But the point being is that the work that you do has some identification with yourself and doesn't become a blanketed thing. This process is to flatten a shape that has been thrown on the wheel to give me a surface such like this as a painterly surface. So I have a wider scope of actually drawing landscapes or abstract designs on the surface, where it's two-dimensionally looked at, but obviously a three-dimensional piece. And this process is to carefully take these boards and sort of wiggle them in, making sure that we don't get any creases in this area here. So what we're trying to do is work it out so we get that situation on both sides. We're squeezing equally on both sides of the pot. And the pot can't be too soft, otherwise it'll collapse. So it has to be fairly right as far as consistency is concerned. Fairly groggy clay, so I don't want to go too fast because it'll have a tendency of just ripping right off. I want to get it out far enough that it's slender enough at the base in order for me to get the design that I want when I put the handle on. Give it just a little bit of a dampening down. If you're working at stoneware, you don't necessarily end up with very violent colors, like your bright yellows and scarlets and so forth that you can get at lower temperatures. So in this sense, it's more difficult to, in the domestic sense, is to get this self-identity thing. So one must rely more on your vocabulary of form and the things you feel personally about, things that affect you, things of nature, things of other people's work to a certain extent that you can extract, not the superficiality of it, but what really makes the thing work, what really makes it tick, and use these elements and expand in your own vocabulary. I'm going to make a very symmetrical circle on this pot by using a calipers, inscribing it in quite deeply on the pot surface itself. You can just tidy up that hole so it's not really seen by taking a very thin piece of clay. We can draw an arc on here. Make a pattern. Well, just to complete the motif that I'm putting on here, it's just a relation of the cloud formation on the top to a tree down below. And at the moment, as you can see, I'm putting in the trunk of the tree. And the same way, I work quite a bit with my fingers, left hand and the right hand, to draw with, to give the quality of line and the quality of undercut, which casts shadows. By taking small pieces of clay like this, and again just ripping the edges of this piece of clay like that to simulate the foliage of the clay, of the tree, as it comes away from the surface of the pot. I'm not quite satisfied with how it does look. Just keep pulling pieces away until you get the edge quality that you want. Whatever's going to be now will be done with glazes, with oxides rubbing onto the surface, and just build up in that way. We can emphasize this tearing quality in relationship to the cloudy, soft effect. We can use a white, shiny glaze to possibly a very dark oxide on here and get a contrast of surfaces on this one piece. What we're doing is putting on the celadon color, or light green, first of all. Then we'll be going over to this glaze, which is the reddish or browny colored glaze. And then lastly, we'll be coming back to this bucket, which is the black glaze. You don't have very much choice. You can't really control exactly how you're going to dip each one. On this, as you can see, we already have wax resisted the bottom. In other words, dip the bottom of the pot into hot wax. If little particles of glaze are on the bottom, we just wipe this off with a sponge. Okay, we're going to glaze a fairly large punch bowl over here. The process being basically the same, except the fact is that we have to work quite quickly so you don't get too much of a buildup of glaze. If you have 2 glazes or 3 glazes, just by intermarrying these 3 glazes, the permutation is just endless. Your oxides, as far as the degree of how many ounces you put in one batch and how many ounces you put in the other batch, will change the density of the particular glaze and so forth. Let it settle so I can handle it a little bit. The pattern that we've created on the outside isn't going to disturb us very much. Mundaneness is simply because a person has stopped thinking about his craft, stopped trying to push himself aesthetically, and simply is churning them out. And at the end of the day, he has churned out 300, 400, 500 mugs, and he marks this as a monetary gain. And again, we're going to glaze this large platter, and in the glazing of it, we're going to try to create a pattern across the surface to give me some sort of suggestion of where I can actually draw eventually onto the pattern of the plate. Again, we can overlap glazes. And even miss out areas like this, so when one glaze, as we showed in the soup bowl, overlaps another glaze, we can take the true color of the other glaze. Again, like we'll be going over. Well, I don't think we'll use that one just now. Go back to this glaze. We're going to create this pattern with a wax resist melted paraffin wax by firstly dipping the mug into the glaze inside and out, and then after the wax has been applied, to dip this into the black glaze, and where the wax is on, it'll create this pattern because the glaze will not take in this particular area. And we're actually applying the wax in a pattern over the surface of the glaze. Some of the water waxes don't work very well immediately as you put on a pattern with your waxes, you can again do it with your glaze and your oxides. In the back of my mind, when the kiln is open, you look at the stuff and you analyze and say, well, you know, if I cross that glaze with that glaze in just a little bit of a different way, as I was, you know, dipping the soup bowls in the glaze, you're creating an excitement for yourself. As far as clay is concerned, you can learn a lot from traditional pottery, there's no question about it. But you cannot have any hang-ups about traditional, how should we say it, things that people have said in books or in articles about what you should not do. In other words, you know, somebody says, well, it would be almost ridiculous if you painted on clay. You know, you shouldn't paint on clay. This is just one instant. But the point being is, why shouldn't you paint on clay? And if a person feels strongly enough about his identity and what he wants to express, and the only way he can do this is by painting on clay, then it is perfectly valid to do that. You know, we come up to the old thing about green and blue don't go together. Coming up to the same thing. What you do with your medium is always the extension of one's own creative ability. And if you want to combine clay with wood, or you want to use epoxies, or you want to use fiberglass in connection with it to make a multiple piece, why not do it? I think you get a lot back from contact with students. You're continually surprised by what they actually come out with, where their identity comes in, which you're always trying to push. No matter what you give a student, as far as technique is concerned and all these things, is minor in relationship to their personal identity. And it's surprising in a matter of 3 or 4 years that you have them in a teaching situation or an apprentice situation, that they do come through in the end with something that is particularly their own. And this is the rewarding part of teaching. Like life itself, it's up to you how much you want to get out of it. And if you have to persevere to further yourself, you have to persevere to find things out. And if this is a way of enjoying life, as it is for me, this perseverance is just a way that I can enjoy my craft and enjoy the things that I do, is by continually trying to find a new direction, not a new way, but a new direction to take myself in, even though I'm using the same theme, in order to extend my vision, extend my experiences.